Hi, everybody. I was telling a friend of mine before when I did this that while I have talked about baseball before, which is Finnish baseball, I've never talked about the other things. So it's gonna be like world premiere debut conversation about a thing that I did 15 years ago. So strap buckle up. So long story short is, first of all, how many folks in here ever watched American baseball, like in history? How many of you here ostensibly have any idea how baseball works? I made a joke about this being a tech meetup and thinking that maybe that might not be an issue. Not trying to peg anybody. It's a safe space. I'm just saying. That being said, given the time situation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the minutia of the sports details. But you have the internet, and I believe in all of you. So just for the record, so we're not going to do a lot of what's the difference? But just anyway. That being said, the long story short here is that about 10-ish years ago, I, who was a child, loved baseball, because of all the stats and the numbers and so forth. I'm less interested in it now, but when I was a kid, I loved it. And about 10 years ago, I discovered, because I had invented a sport, we'll get there later, it turns out that in Finland, they play a version of baseball. And you're like, wait, what? That's what I said. Well, fast forward 10 years, and it turns out that with some veracity that I'm probably the preeminent American fan of this sport. As in when I went to Finland in August to watch a playoff game of my favorite team, yes, I have one. I did 4 media interviews, including an interview on national television. It's on Twitter, you can see it. It's ridiculous. So the whole point of this conversation is how did we get here? How did this all happen? And so first, before we get into how we got here, I'll give you the basics of Finnish baseball. I will talk about this a bit. As you might know, in American baseball, there are 9 players in the field. They all hit. In Finnish baseball, there are also 9 players. They all hit. There are also 3 extra players called jokers. In America, they're called designated hitters, but they have 3 of them. 3 strikes, you're out. Instead of 3 balls, they're just 2. Batters can use each one of their strikes. So here, if you hit the ball, strike 1, and you hit the ball in the play, you've got to run. In Finland, you don't have to run if you don't want to. You're like, that wasn't really great. I use that to advance a runner. People who understand baseball are like, oh, right now. Because it totally is like that. Also, in American baseball, we're all fairly familiar, kickball, whatever you play, right? If you hit the ball out of the park, it's a home run. We all love home runs, right? Finnish baseball is a triple. So if you get to third base, that's a home run in Finnish baseball. And you stay on third base and wait to get scored home again and score a second run, which is positively hilarious to watch. In the interest of time, I will not show you this Wall Street Journal video. It talks about baseball, but it's really interesting, and it talks about the differences, which basically everything I just covered then. Here's a GIF. Watch the catch. Pretty cool. I should have brought a glove. I had a glove and a Finnish basketball glove and a ball that I meant to bring, and it's on my table at the house. So, fire my assistant. In terms of the differences in the field, a baseball field has a very large outfield. A Finnish baseball field does not. Basically. If you want to see this for scale, there's scale, but if you want to see actual pictures, this is Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. It's very pretty. Respect your feelings about Los Angeles, maybe. But nonetheless, it's really pretty. It's fantastic. I did a tour earlier this year. It's really great. Lots of outfield, lots of infield. Here is Sarketna, which is in Vimpoli, Finland, about 4.5 hours from Helsinki. From August, this is the field. As you can see, it's a turf actually under that, and then there's dirt on top of the turf. That is the field. The grass is not in play. Though if you Google that, well, you'll find out, or use Bing or whatever you want to use, DuckDuckGo or whatever. This is not a sponsored talk. You'll find that the ball is in play, but bounces in play and goes over the hump. They still chase it. It's quite hilarious. So hold on. So how did I find this? How did this all happen? So in 2004, I spent some time at a summer camp because of the tennis thing. I've been doing that since I was 9, and I was coaching. I had tennis directly summer camp, which I had been at before. And it rained a lot that summer, and it was a very nice camp, but they didn't have any tennis courts this camp. And so we would go inside the little field house they had and, do lessons and things like that. But as you can imagine, with a group of kids, and because I had been there before, I built a pretty good program. So we had a lot of kids who were pretty excited to play tennis. Instead of like 5, 6, 9 kids playing, I'd have 20 or 30 kids at a time who were like, all right, Ron, what are we going to do? I had a very elaborate league with all kinds of stats and everything. I nerded out about this stuff. So long story short, when it rained this entire summer, like literally, and the courts would get really slippery and so forth. So we're like, we got bored basically. It's like, well, what are we going to do? And so after we got tired of being in the field house, we started doing different things with tennis balls. There's a punchline, I promise. It's not just a slide. Although it'd be funny if I just did this for 5 minutes. But anyway, so it rained and we were just figuring out what to do. And so we started taking tennis balls and tennis rackets and like basically creating hybrid sports. So first we were like tennis ball, tennis racket, and basketball court. And we did it with volleyball. That seems pretty logical, right? Like there's all these things, and none of them really took until we took the tennis racket and the tennis ball onto the soccer field. And then all hell broke loose. So in 2004, we invented a thing called soccer, which is, we renamed tennis polo because Googling. The basics are soccer field, tennis racket, tennis ball. Pretty straightforward. You want to get the ball into the goal. And I'll get into how we sort of change that. But basically, there's your field. I'll get into the nuances here. So in 2004, everyone had a racket. And when I say took over camp, I mean, since the summer camp is in Connecticut, it was hot all summer. We had days that I went to visit actually this summer. I hadn't been there in years. And people were telling lore about that summer and about how, like, you don't understand. Tennis got as many signups as the waterfront did. This is not a lie. 50 kids would sign up just to play soccer. It was absurd. Older kids, little kids, it didn't make a difference. We don't know why. I did not intend for this to happen. I would have days where I wouldn't have tennis soccer signups just so that kids wouldn't come do it. And they would say, well, if you do it tomorrow, I'll come, okay. So everybody had a racket. The goalkeepers had a racket, of course. The goal was to dribble the ball into the goal as you try to hit it into the goal. Goals were worth 1 point, and you could kick it into the goal. And there were no set number of players. It was even number, of course, per team, but it didn't matter. 10 on 10, 20 on 20. So in 2010, I went to a different summer camp. Years later, I had a job. I was working in tech, but I had a summer that I could go to camp, so I did. Different camp in Vermont. So sports camp. So I went from a place where kids were playing soccer and we invented it. It was fun. I'd do it wherever I was around kids and we'd play, but it wasn't a big deal. So 2010, I went to a different camp. And this was a sports camp. So there's kids there for tennis, soccer, and horseback riding. These kids are generally athletes. And so they heard about it, and they were like, you have to play this. And I'm like, all right, fine, we'll do it. It took over camp again. But this time it was the older kids that insisted. And kids, they see the older kids, so everybody's like, well, if they're doing it, we're gonna do it. So literally it took over camp. And so there, the owner was not so excited about everybody having rackets. So we had to change the rules. So the kids decided, not me, they're like, what if we just only have the goalkeepers have rackets? And he's like, you can try it and see if it works. It took over, it destroyed camp, in a good way. But the new rules in 2011, we changed it, 9 on 9. Goalkeepers only had rackets, no one else did. You're trying to throw the ball into the goal. We eventually created a 13-yard arc, which you saw on the slide there before, and then played around with at times, because we played 60 games of soccer that summer, with an experimental 2-point line and those point wins. I have an entire photo album of this stuff from that summer. And so off and on since then, it's been a thing that's been in my back pocket. Like I said, I have not talked about it publicly, ever. My friends have known about it for a long time. It's on Wikipedia, but it's not something that I've really, it's just it's like party conversation. When a friend says, Ron, tell them about soccer. So I've always asked this question in jest. This is my high school team this year playing soccer. Because they Googled me and found it and insisted we play. I didn't bring it up. I wasn't gonna bring it up. It's high school kids. I'm like, it's a little weird. They insisted. So I'll get into this. But anyway, does inventing a sport make you a game designer? And I don't have the answer to that question. But I did it and it happened. And so I guess the takeaways here about what I learned from game design. Don't underestimate boredom. So the reason I found Pace Apollo in the first place, this is women's Pace Apollo, they have a league too, was I started doing research on every sport you could think of. So I can tell you the origin story of most major sports and minor sports around the world because of this 2005 jaunt that I went on after we invented soccer. And most sports were invented because in 1900 some guy, ostensibly, was working in some place in a YMCA and basically was there are a bunch of kids and they're bored. That's the origin story of basketball. These football players are inside the gym. They can't play football in the gym and they're rambunctious. And then the director said, you have a week to figure out how to keep these kids busy or you're fired. And he put 2 peach baskets on a wall, and that's how basketball got invented. So like you can't underestimate boredom when you're thinking about making sports or making games in general. You can't iterate without an audience. And so one of the funny things about inventing this and creating it and sort of just being kind of blasé about it, honestly, was I joined it back in 2005, people did this, a Yahoo Sports group of folks who were like experimental sports creators, right? And it was like a lot of people, mostly dudes again, who were like creating sports in their house, like I wrote some rules. All I do is find someone to play it. And so they were tripped out when I had like photos and like rules and like a Wikipedia page and a website and they're like, well, I don't understand how you found kids to do it. And I'm like, well, we didn't set out to do this. It just happened, But the point is I've probably seen about 100 games of soccer in the last 15 years that I've seen. Now, this doesn't include the emails I get from British people once a year asking me about lesson plans for soccer that they can introduce to their class. So like, that's not them. That's just me personally being involved. But without that iteration, none of this would be possible. We wouldn't have changed the rules. We wouldn't have been able to adapt it. Change is inevitable. I don't play a lot of computer games, but the ones I do play, I know a lot of folks are really, really hell-bent and sort of afraid of like, oh, you're cheating. Oh, you're changing the rules. That's not fair. That's the way you play. There's only one way to play this. And the beauty of sports is that they evolve all the time. They have to iterate. They have to change because people get bored or things change. Technology changes. Safety reasons why. Look at football right now. All the things they're going through with with CTE and these injuries. Understanding like how to change a sport to adapt to changing times. And the last thing is simplicity is key. The thing about soccer that we loved from the beginning, and I still love to this day, I told you my high school kids played it, is it takes me 2 minutes to explain it. Literally, I stand there and I'm like, here's the ball, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, have fun. And then they get at it. And then from there, they're able to do their own thing. And I think the thing we learned also that I didn't put a slide for or a bullet for, the beauty of this is I think that because there's no prescriptive, best player of this thing, anybody can approach it with this freedom of I think it's why Ultimate works, right? Is that this freedom of oh, there's no Michael Jordan of soccer, right? So I can just go out there and do this, or LeBron James, I can just go do this, have fun with it, throw myself at it, and maybe I'll be good at it too. And we saw that with little kids in 2004, and I saw it 5 months ago when we did it in Oregon City. So Pace Apollo, like I said, has definitely been a thing that's been a big part of my life. I've been to the embassy. The Finnish embassy follows me on Twitter. I have no less than 50 followers from Finland on all my social media accounts who respond to everything I post in Finnish, which is terrible. My Finnish is really bad. Because there's not a lot of Finnish teachers in town. So if you have one of those, feel free to send me one. But again, I do enjoy the fact that in 1920, some guy came to America, saw baseball, and said, I can make this better. And went home and did that. And that's how Pace Apollo exists. It's exactly what happened. And his idea was training soldiers for war. But, which is why a lot of the way the sport looks the way that it does. But think about, what that does. You're respecting your audience. So Pace Apollo is only big in Finland. It's not popular anywhere else in the world. Every year there's an article in American papers who are oh, look at this cool Finnish thing. Isn't this weird? And every year they say the same things about it that they said last year. But this year it's the Wall Street Journal, and the next year it'll be in the New York Times. But they don't care. I go to Finland and people do not care that it is not popular anywhere else. It's popular there. And not even in the cities. It's a country sport. But these towns have a whole ecosystem built around the sport that people embrace from a young age and grow up with it. And the thing is because of the skills similarities, it would not be too crazy to imagine a world where Finnish players could come to the States and play American baseball. It take a lot of adaptation, but not to the extent to say cricket or other sports that are bat and ball games. But they don't want to because they like their version of their game at their home. So respecting your audience is really important and not trying to be one size fits all. You're not trying to be anything that you're not. We are this game. Our game is better. We can tell you the reasons why our game is better than your game. We don't want to play your game. And that's okay. And we're not threatened by it at all. And the last part is embracing evolution. Paces has changed a bit over time. The format of the game has changed some, but the core game stays the same. Soccer is the same way. That despite all the changes that we've made over time and in different states, I've been all over the country with this thing, that at the end of the day, it's the same game we made up in 2004 on the soccer field because it rained too much. And so embracing that evolution while still believing in the core product, if you will, is why things can endure. So Thanks for listening.